Today I'm going to talk about 8 things you should know before traveling to Mexico as a expat or a tourist. So first thing I would say is to pack more than shorts. So why I say that is so many people come to Mexico thinking that basically we're all a beach, that Mexico is all just some beach town and that it's always hot. And the truth is that Mexico has a very diverse climate. Just like the United States, Mexico has its beaches, but it also has, when you go to Chihuahua, you have snow. Whenever you go to Guadalajara, you have like California weather where it's really hot for 3 months of the year and then really cool for the rest of the year. And so what I will also say is if you wear shorts, just like any city in the United States, if you go to a bar or a restaurant, a lot of people, when you're at the fancier bars and restaurants, just won't even let you in. And so I have witnessed that myself when I had one friend come from Houston. He thought Guadalajara was going to be a beach town, and he only packed shorts. When we went to a bar later that night, they wouldn't let him in, and we had to find another option. So just make sure you bring more than shorts when visiting places like Guadalajara. At least do some research to find out more about the area that you're going to find out if shorts are even necessary. Number 2 is to keep expensive things at home. When I say that, I mean whenever you bring something expensive, you have to keep in mind that although Mexico can be very safe if you're careful, but it can also be very unsafe if you're not careful. And so when I say that, don't make yourself a target by bringing expensive things. Don't wear a $20,000 watch or $1,000 shoes. Although Mexico has many, many parts of the country that are very safe, and parts of the city like Zona Andares, where a lot of people are actually wearing very expensive things, and they're Mexican people that are wearing very expensive things. But I will say that they understand the environment they're in, and so they know where to go and where not to go, and so they realize they're not making themselves targets. As a tourist, I definitely would not recommend trying that. Number 3, it's something that goes down and personal to me. I got my cell phone stolen while I was in the street. Why is that? Because in Mexico, and really anywhere in Latin America, there's a lot of poverty, and people will do things to make a little bit of money. And in this case, my phone got stolen. I was walking in the street talking to my friend, and then someone came on a motorcycle and stole the phone right out of my hands. And through that experience, I actually talked to hundreds of other people, on social media who had the same experience through chat groups. And it's really common. It happens all the time in Guadalajara. It happens all the time in Mexico. And the best way to go about that is if you have to check your phone, walk up the steps to a business really quick and look at it real quick, and then go somewhere else. Or walk into a nearby restaurant just for a moment, or just do something to make it to where it's not present to someone who's on a motorcycle or a bike or someone on a sidewalk. Number 4, I would say be very careful around the police. And why do I say that is the police in Mexico, although there's a lot of great police, there's also a lot of bad police. And it's a very common thing here, unfortunately, where police will try to bribe you. And because of that, they'll try to find any small thing to give you a fine. When I was staying in Playa del Carmen for a few months, there was one person who didn't wear a mask while they're on the street whenever there was basically not any kind of lockdown or anything like that. They just had the mask rule at that time. But he was on the sidewalk, he was walking, he wasn't next to anybody, and a cop saw him without the mask on, and they bribed the guy and said, "Give us $100 or we're going to take you to jail." Would they have taken him to jail? I don't know, probably not. But you don't want to put yourself into that situation to where you have to make a decision between one or the other. And then also, I had a personal experience where I was on the beach in Puerto Vallarta I guess after their beach time, which I was not aware that they had a time that you weren't allowed to be on the beach. It was around 11:30 at night, and they came down. They told me while I was in the dark underneath the seawall, basically they needed to search me, see if I had anything, and then from there they saw how much money I had in my wallet, and they said to let you go, you'll have to give us money, which I didn't do, but that's something that they do try to do often. Is they try to bribe people into not going to jail, which is very common. I mean, I was even in an Uber drive one time, and we were in the airport, which for Uber, the airport is a zone where they're not allowed to be. It's illegal in Guadalajara, and they got stopped, and they had to bribe the cop or the federale or whoever it was they had to bribe them to not get a larger fine than what the bribe was or whatever. So super common in Mexico. So what I'll say is just do not try to do any tiny small offense and beware of small laws. Whether that be driving your own car past the border and being in certain areas that that the government doesn't allow for U.S. people to drive without having a different permit, or whether that's being on the beach 30 minutes after the curfew time, or whether that's anything that normally someone might just say, hey, will you go home? We're closed. I would just recommend knowing ahead of time and not putting yourself in a situation to where a cop will try to take advantage of you. Number five is a good one because I feel like a lot of tourists, they are unaware of this. So what we consider to be polite is different than what Mexico considers to be polite. For example, in the USA, we speak English. So when we get here and we speak English to other people, we don't think we're doing anything wrong by just assuming that they know our language. But at the end of the day, it's very unpolite, and we should not expect people in Mexico whose native language basically is Spanish. Although there is a few people here, well, more than a few, there's a good percentage of people in Mexico that do know English. It's better to not assume and ask first. Like, it's very easy, hablas inglés. If they say no, just say, lo siento, necesito practicar mi español. That's all you need to learn. You could also use Google Translator, which is another point that I believe is just really life-changing for traveling in Mexico. The point of Google Translator, which makes point number 6, it's so good to have. It's so good to have. I recommend downloading it before you even get to the plane to come to Mexico, because as soon as you get here, unless you're going to Cancun or a tourist town, no one's really going to be able to speak fluently with you unless they've studied English for a while, which is not like a crazy percentage of people. I would say in Guadalajara, maybe 15% of the people know English, which means that the other 85% of the people you're talking to do not know English. And so I recommend getting Google Translate. It's very easy to use. Even if you're at restaurants, you can take a picture of the menu and it will translate the entire menu for you. Same thing with books or any writing. It'll translate it right there into writing for you. And, of course, you can do the voice where they can talk, you can talk back. I used it for like the first 6 months I was in Mexico, and it was a life changer. I definitely recommend it. Another point I have, along with being polite, to kind of trace back, is that whenever you're driving in an Uber, be a little bit careful, because the cars that are brand new, they don't make them the same for their base models that they do in the United States. I mean, a lot of the brand new cars, they still have the roll-up windows instead of the electric windows. And they also they don't have soft closed doors. They don't have soft closed trunks. And so when you close the door, it's better to kind of let your hand go with it rather than just slamming it. Same thing goes with the trunk. My first few times that I drove in an Uber here, coming from the airport, I slammed the trunk not realizing it wasn't soft close. And the Uber drivers were super mad at me. They basically, in a very angry way, told me to not ever do that again. And so what I recommend is just being very soft with the vehicles here and making sure you close them softly. Because we're not used to the soft, or for things not being soft close. You don't, in the United States, you almost have to force things down, but here in Mexico, that's not the case. Number 7, be familiar with your surroundings, and if you're not, do not be there at night. For example, if you want to go to downtown Guadalajara, Centro Guadalajara, in the night, and they have the beautiful churches and everything like that, and you want to walk around and just kind of sightsee, that might not be the greatest area in some areas, because it's at night, just like anywhere, the night gets a little bit more unsafe, and what might be very popping and have a lot of people during the day might not be the safest place at night all the time. Now, there are places that are safe at night, of course, just like anywhere, but I would say definitely be careful at night where you're at. That's all I can really say about that, is just be very, very careful where you're at. Make sure even during the daytime that you're not in a dangerous zone. Do your research, ask around, maybe ask your Uber driver, ask some other people, what are some good zones to be at as a tourist. The thing that I would like to bring up that wasn't on my list, when you're trying food in Mexico, be a little careful, because whenever when you have street vendors, you don't always have regulations with the food, so you don't know if it's been left out overnight or what the case is. But I have heard, including myself, numerous cases of having stomach problems for a month or 2 months after having tacos or something from a truck, from any of these food trucks basically here. And there's probably a lot of amazing places, definitely try them. Maybe just do some research on where you're going. And if it's not a popular food truck, you can always ask, is the food fresh? And hope that they're telling the truth, because Mexico does have a lot of great native, small vendors who can sell you food. But just be careful with that, because also, from my experience, I've gotten sick eating taco stand food here. And so I just want everybody to be aware and careful. And then lastly, whenever you're in Mexico, you have to realize that people here, the average GDP per capita is less than the United States. And yes, things are cheaper here, but you don't need to tell them, the natives, stuff like, wow, the price is so low, or wow, it's so much cheaper than the United States, because in their eyes, they don't see it the same as you are. It would kind of be like someone coming from New York or California, going into a very low income area and saying, wow, the prices are so cheap. And then the people in that state or in that city get offended, because they're basically like, you make all this money in your state, but in our state, the average income is way lower. You can't call that cheap, because to us, it's expensive. It's the same thing here. You don't want to make people feel bad about their economy, and so I just recommend staying away from saying to the locals, wow, it's so cheap. And that basically wraps up everything today on this podcast. Thank you so much for listening in. I hope this helps some people. And go ahead and subscribe and follow. I'll have another video soon about business or about Mexico. And I hope that you guys have a great day.